Now, the airport operator, BAA, has significantly reduced its losses. The owner of London's Heathrow Airport and 5 other UK airports says pre-tax losses for the 9 months to the end of September fell by 75%, although still stood at £192 million. Its business was boosted by record traffic at Heathrow and a 10% rise in retail income per passenger. The company also confirmed it planned a bond issue up to £325 million to complete the refinancing of its existing £466 million debt. BAA's owner Ferrovial said last week it wants to sell a 10% stake in BAA to halve its debt pile. Joining me now, I'm pleased to say, is Colin Matthews, BAA's chief executive from the Gherkin there. Mr. Matthews, I want to talk about your results, but firstly, if we can just pick up on this issue of security, much talked about this morning. I know you've been asked about it already. You don't make the rules about security at airports, the government does, but your staff at Heathrow, at Stansted, do enforce those rules. Do you agree with BA's chairman that the security procedures as they stand, some of them at least, are completely redundant?
Well, I don't think anyone disagrees that the first need of passengers is to be safe, and you're right, it is the government who tells us the measures we need to take. Having said that, the way we do security today is the result of one regulation and requirement having been laid on top of another, one from Europe and an additional one from the UK, and Martin Broughton was pointing out the differences in the United States. We could do a better job if we were able to start with a blank sheet of paper and design together with the government the best way of achieving the required outcome. I'm happy to say that discussion is happening, and I'm reasonably optimistic that we will be able to progressively over time improve the way we do it. And whatever the arrangements are, of course, it's up to us to make sure that we do so with the utmost courtesy in our airports.
Let's imagine you've got that blank sheet of paper, Mr. Matthews. Can you give me an example of one security procedure that, in your view, could and perhaps should be relaxed?
Well, I think the blank sheet of paper might well include saying, given the range of technologies and capabilities we have, how do we make sure we invest that in proportion to where the risks come from? And I'm not referring to profiling, but there are ways, and your previous person on the programme referred to it, of potentially making sure we focus our best resources in the most effective way. And I think that is a constructive way, carefully and cautiously, with the authorities to design a better process.
Sure, but which way specifically? I'm asking you to name, if you wouldn't mind, some perhaps checks that could be relaxed.
I don't think I can do that, but I do agree that, for instance, for some people, taking shoes off in a security lane is extraordinarily uncomfortable, and we're much better off from our point of view being able to do the security checks in a way that is comfortable as well as safe, comfortable for our passengers, that is.
Mr. Broughton mentioned, and I'm sure your passengers probably tell you this, about for example, removing shoes before passing through security. Is that really necessary given the technology that you referred to there?
Well, that's the requirement today, and I do think that can be very uncomfortable for some passengers to have to take their shoes off. But I think that the key topic is saying what do we want to achieve, and then what's the best way to do that. And those discussions are going on, I'm happy to say, with the DfT.
Down on this. Sorry, you're being very careful about what you say, and I understand that. But on this issue of shoes, for example, you say it's very important, you say it's uncomfortable. Is it your view that it's necessary?
Well, it is my view that we need to agree with government the right processes to take, and that's what we're determined to do.
So what would you be saying to government, that in my view it's not necessary and therefore there could be changes?
No, what I'd be saying to government is exactly what I'm saying to you, that we can do a better job for passengers if we start from a clean sheet of paper and design an overall consistent process. Let me give you one example. After the Christmas Day attacks in 2009, we did put in place additional security requirements in central security, and we agreed effective ways to do that which didn't provoke longer queues in our central security area. Okay. So we can do it, I think. Certainly it's our ambition to be more involved in that discussion and more effective about not only keeping passengers absolutely safe, but making it comfortable for them.
OK, let's talk about your results, Mr. Matthews, the reason you're here anyway. Record numbers of passengers, and yet BAA is still losing money when, And how are you going to turn that situation around? When are you going to be back in profit?
Well, I think, honestly, the right measure of financial performance for us is EBITDA, cash flow. And in terms of cash flow, in the first 9 months, we generated £690 million. And let me tell you what we did with that money. Practically pound for pound, every single one of them has been reinvested in our airports, the vast bulk of that in Heathrow. And that, I think, is probably the biggest single capital investment, privately funded, may well be in the UK and probably across Europe. Hugely important, significant for the economy around London, but also significant for the airport, because Heathrow's job is to connect British business with global markets. And some global markets are growing strongly. It's important that our business travellers can make those connections smoothly. And if you look at our numbers and the growth in passenger numbers, it is the business traveller most of all who's out there doing their job.
You mentioned the fact that Ferrovial, your owner, is looking at selling a 10% stake in BAA. Do you think there will be interest in buying into a company that is carrying around, clearly, such a high level of debt?
Well, I think the key thing from that announcement, I mean, BAA is a company that's run in the UK. We've been really fortunate to have three main shareholders who are clearly committed for the long term. Ferrovial has reconfirmed its commitment for the long term.
Sure, but you're a company also that's heavily in debt, Mr. Matthews.
Well, we do have a lot of debt, and that's because we have a huge amount of asset, and it would be inefficient for that our financial structures not to have a proportion of that funded by debt. In fact, we have made a significant progress in the last 12 months to get our debt arrangements back to a normal state of life, which were impeded by the credit crunch. We have been present in the bond markets, accessing capital markets in a normal way, and that's very positive for us. So we have moved from a year ago, a situation which was quite different today, into a much more normal funding situation, and that's very positive.
OK, Colin Matthews, Chief Executive of BAA, thanks very much for joining us this morning. That's all from me, Dermot. More next hour.